One of the largest PE firms in the world, KKR, executives' push to spread employee stock ownership begins to gain traction. Is private equity evolving into a force for good? Can vulture capitalists actually liberate the working class? My name is James Lee. Welcome to my channel 5149, where I talk business, politics, society, and today we're going to talk about private equity. Specifically, a new brand of private equity that aims to, quote, get more stock of industrial and manufacturing companies into the hands of their workers.
Private equity, often seen as the enemy of business, buying companies in middle America, loading on a bunch of debt and slashing the workforce.
That's how I know private equity, and maybe you as well. And if you're curious to know more, I've done a comprehensive breakdown of the entire private equity industry and its corrosive practices on Breaking Points. I'll link that video in the description below. But now things are different. They're pro-workers, so they say.
In the otherwise sleepy town of Arthur, Illinois, a life-changing surprise for the hundreds of workers at the locally based garage door manufacturer, CHI.
We do have some news to share.
CHI is getting sold for $3 billion to steel manufacturer Nucor. But it's not just the company's private equity owners who are cashing out. So too are the truck drivers and factory workers and even the office manager, Rhonda Jameson.
This was a great day for Rhonda.
Employees received envelopes with their bonus details. On average, hourly workers received $175,000, with the most tenured earning more than $750,000.
I'll feel great.
The idea of giving rank-and-file workers equity grants in a sale is the brainchild of Pete Stavros of KKR, one of the nation's largest and oldest private equity firms.
Wow, okay. I'm not going to sit here and deny the truth. The windfall for rank-and-file workers at CHI is not insignificant, and I'm really extremely happy for them. So could this serve as a shift in narrative and provide a legitimate anecdote that full-throated capitalism can be a force for good and can truly function as a conduit to redistribute wealth from top to bottom? Well, without once again denying the nature of this positive story, let's also take a look at some other information that's, I think, equally true to give you more context to hopefully empower you to decide what's really going on here. Ownership Works, the nonprofit founded by Pete Stavros, the co-head of KKR, is, according to their website, quote, fueling the movement to establish employee ownership as the new standard of socially responsible business and investing, one that creates great places to work and generates superior financial returns for businesses, investors, and employees alike. Sounds very enticing, this kind of stakeholder capitalist mantra, the idea that business should not only build wealth for shareholders, but also for workers and the community at large. This is an article from the World Economic Forum promoting Ownership Works, how one new nonprofit could help build billions in wealth for working families by 2030. 2030, a bit of a ways in the future. I don't know if this is the case for you, but it certainly evokes the kind of corporate, greenwashed, lofty, but also nebulous environmental goals espoused by many major corporations. Like, we are aware of all the harm that we're causing, environmental, ecological, social, economic, and we want to fix it, not immediately, but we definitely do for the sake of public perception. We want to adopt some of that language in the meantime. Billions in investments results by 2030, 2040, nice round number that's not too close to the near future, but not too distant either. Citing an article from Fast Company, quote, Ownership Works is not creating companies truly owned by workers over the long term with worker voice in governance. However well-meaning the Ownership Works project, it is at risk of becoming a new form of greenwashing, creating a few social benefits while driving massively more wealth to the wealthy. So nothing truly new in terms of a typical corporate playbook, twisting, I think, a fairly straightforward claim like employee-owned, reworking the definition to the point where the term becomes completely disassociated from the reality, sort of like how cage-free eggs aren't necessarily even cage-free. Back to the Fast Company article, the difference between short-term equity and real employee ownership can be seen in the stories of Gibson Guitars, taken over by KKR in 2018, and Taylor Guitars, which transitioned to 100% employee ownership in 2021. At Gibson, KKR piled $250 million in new debt on the company, using $225 million of that for a special dividend to the private equity fund. You catch that? They borrowed $250 million against the company and use most of it, 225 million of it, not to grow the business, but to pay a special dividend to themselves. That is absolutely wild. At around the same time, it announced $7 million in profit sharing for Gibson's estimated 800 employees, which is less than 9,000 each. KKR executives stand to profit massively more. At Taylor Guitars, by contrast, an ESOP trust, not a private equity fund, now controls the firm, which reported revenue of $122 million in 2019. By the way, ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. Rather than a 5-year time horizon, the buyout deal involved 10-year financing from a Canadian pension fund, which is enjoying stable returns suitable for its beneficiaries. Taylor is not hamstrung by excessive debt. Once the loan is paid off, the firm's 1,200 employees will own the firm free and clear and can enjoy potential financial upside over the long run. You see, KKR isn't really adopting a true employee ownership plan. They're just responding to the reality they face, which is in situations of corporate greed or profiteering, the public is pretty unified in opposition. So now they got to do this little song and dance of, we care about workers' rights too, but as you can clearly see in the difference in incentive structure, KKR's primary concern will always be KKR, investors, and shareholders. And the truth is, they don't really have a moral obligation beyond that. So there can almost be no other outcome other than to co-opt a truly revolutionary idea like employee ownership and turn it into something milquetoast that will be acceptable to corporate boards, executives, and shareholders. Proponents of employee governance like Ian McFarland, the president of a worker-owned environmental consulting firm, have argued that the Ownership Works initiative misuses the term employee ownership since the model grants workers restricted stock or other forms of equity before selling the company, meaning that there is no long-term plan for employee control. Once again, very reminiscent of the corporate greenwashing we've seen so much of in the last decade and a half or so. Like I said, I think corporations will never be at the forefront of progress. They're merely there to react to whatever movement is in vogue, co-opting that language and then continuing on their merry way. We have greenwashing, and now we have worker washing. Quote, they're doing what big capital does, take over a concept like employee ownership and make it their own in order to make more money, said Ian McFarland. So what I think is a more accurate characterization of what private equity is calling employee ownership is really something more like a small transaction fee in a massive deal or a relatively cheap ad for some much needed good PR.
You think other firms are watching and listening? Maybe they're going to learn a little bit of something from this? Good PR is not the worst thing in the world.
Exactly. Well, they absolutely are.
There you go. Good PR. And I'm not saying that a few people won't benefit, right? CHI employees made out with some pretty good money, and KKR was also handsomely rewarded with its highest returning U.S. buyout in 30 years. And also, I have nothing against Pete Stavros either. But the problem is, what about the deals? What about the private equity deals that don't work? A 2019 Cal Poly study found that 20% of private equity takeovers ended in bankruptcy, a rate 10 times higher than for non-private equity firms. So maybe rather than focusing on debating the merit of KKR's new worker initiative, I think the bigger question we should be asking is whether private equity firms should be able to take a loan using the target company's assets as collateral, saddle that company with debt, use the loan to immediately pay themselves and their investors dividends, and kind of wipe their hands clean if the company goes belly up a few years down the line because they aren't able to afford the interest payments. What kind of effect does that have on a community? To me, something really important to consider is that a true employee ownership model necessarily requires a change in the way you do business. But in the case of KKR and Stavros' new startup Ownership Works, or any other PE firm right now for that matter, no matter how much they espouse messages about workers' rights or inequality or fair capitalism, their business model right now remains unchanged and therefore still must operate within the confines of a predefined set of parameters that just can't be violated, meaning that whatever the arrangement, whatever the project is, it cannot encroach or infringe on the interests of the sponsoring corporations, its shareholders, nor its investors. That is all from me today. What do you think? Is private equity joining, or are they just co-opting the employee ownership movement? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I always learn interesting tidbits from you guys, so I really appreciate you guys leaving those comments. Also, what other topics would you like me to explore? If you enjoyed this video and want to support my work, please click on that like button, share this video, and consider subscribing and clicking on that notification bell icon so you can be the first to watch each week. And as always, thank you so much for your time. I'll see you next week.